Y'all want to hear a story about how me and this sis lost our magazine? It's kind of long, but it's full of suspense. Joicelyn, I asked you specifically if we could talk to Keith, if you could say something to him today. If you could say the thing that hasn't been said, what would that be?
I don't have anything to say to him. I went through a period where I just did not appreciate his energy. And so I had to come to a forgiveness thing, like in a real way, because this was like my child. I don't know, I just felt like somebody took my creation, my thing away from me and didn't care about it and treated it like it was just any old girl off the street or some girl you could control. And I've dealt with it.
Welcome to Culturati, Conversations with Kierna Mayo. I'm Kierna. On Culturati, we'll explore the connection between the culture, the community, and the self. In some respects, mostly every interview I've ever done, somehow every meaningful conversation comes back to that existential connection. And maybe it's because I feel it so strongly in my own story. Today, we wrap up my honey saga. If you didn't listen to part 1, The History of Honey, the Sweet Edition, hit pause, check it out, then come back here. Do that so you have the real context for what's about to happen. I'll wait up. In my new life as a book editor, I received a huge box of One World books, and in it was the New York Times bestseller and Pulitzer Prize finalist Minor Feelings by Cathy Park Hong. Let me share some of this very special work with you. In art, movements have been built on the bromances of bad white boys. As I read about the friendships between, and she goes on to list groups of white men, she continues, I crave to read about the friendships where women, and more urgently, women of color, came of age as artists and writers. The last few decades have ushered in legions of feminist writers and artists, but it's still fairly uncommon to read about female friendships founded on their aesthetic principles, end quote. Whew, I mean, that gets me. Aesthetic principles? That was the thing Joicelyn and I had. Sorry, I'll finish reading. The deeper I dug in the annals of literary and art history, the more alone I felt. But in life, I was not alone. I realized I had already formed that kind of bond through my own friendships, Hong wrote. Honestly, when I first read this work, I cried. This woman was saying so much, not only in art movements, but hip-hop movements have also been built on the bromances of bad white and black boys. Baby bad was always the goal.
Bad boy, come out and play. I know we had to do a remix, right?
Fake bad, it turns out, for a lot of them. In the 90s, it seemed all hip-hop publishers splashed around in a community cesspool of misogyny. Misogynoir, to be exact. Now, in their defense, the entire culture was mired in what sometimes felt like a secret society campaign against us, Black women. Whether subtle or flagrant, it was a whole vibe, even if we didn't have the specific language at the time. It was, the best way I can describe it, it was just the worst kind of everywhere sensation. So if it wasn't happening in front of a camera, it was happening behind one. It was in conference rooms and clubs. I can't front, it was abso-fucking-lutely what we shook our ass to. But don't get it twisted. All the sisters, from the video vixens to the record executives, who were the real driving force of the 90s quote-unquote industry, were fierce. Facts. Still, the culture war against the girls played out in insidious ways. Now, different publishers, black ones and white ones, like all male power brokers in the hip-hop 90s, swam at different depths of the cesspool. Some only dipped a big toe in, others dove into the deep end. Sure, some hired women in key roles. Of course, some also made it hell for those women. Some only hired women as needed, as needed. Any of these publishers still around today would say, "Not me. Of course not you, bro. Never you. Never that." Every good drama has an anti-hero, what you'd call the antagonist, maybe even villain. In this story about how me and my sis made a magazine and then lost it, well, Keith Clinkscales is that guy. At the time of our saga, he was the young president at Vibe Ventures, soon to be the new founder of Vanguard Media. Now, let me say this. I know Keith's plans were not exactly to be the villain in this story. Not now, and certainly not then. He was too busy shaping his own story to consider how he showed up in ours. He was egotistical, and latently, sometimes even blatantly sexist. But again, hip-hop had far worse dudes. If anything, Keith was just ambitious as hell. Before long, publishing Vibe wasn't enough. He was determined to start his own black publishing venture and have several titles to his name. Sometime in '97, in between Keith's entrepreneurial dreams and them actually coming to life, Joicelyn and I submitted our business plan for what would become Honey Magazine directly to him. We were aspiring entrepreneurs too. We'd heard all kinds of no's before, but those people weren't part of hip-hop culture in the least. Either I said it to her, or she said it to me, or maybe we even said it to each other. Girl, Keith Clinkscales. We thought if anyone would understand what we were trying to do with this fashion and lifestyle publication for women of the hip-hop generation like us, it would have to be him. Wrong, 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 wrong. White boys, black boys, bromances. When we were shopping for the magazine, I'm taking you back now, Joicelyn and I had given you our plan. Do you remember that? Do you remember how you responded to any of that? You were still at Vibe at the time.
I do remember us having a discussion about it, yeah. But I don't remember how I responded.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was actually a business plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so after a good deal of time, when you gave it back to us, it really, you obviously weren't saying yes or no, but I distinctly remember you having some reservations around the fact that Essence existed and how were we going to compete against them.
I do remember whatever time it was roughly with Vibe. You know, Vibe was not a walk in the park. You know, it seemed like it, but it was difficult. You know, so there was always challenges with different things. So at that time in particular, there was challenging times. You know, when I would go to the business meetings or the finance meetings or the meetings of the people that would provide the money or the resources, these were the things they would constantly bring up, especially when there was established competition in the fray.
I also think to a lot of people who were invested in the Honey experiment, that we are truthful in this conversation. I really do want to know why you didn't approach Joicelyn and myself when you first decided to purchase Honey from Harris, because I have, my memory is a little questionable, so I'm not going to assume that you remember everything, but I'll just let you know we found out when the deal was just about completed, and in my opinion, that really helped to feed the acrimony. It was problematic from the outset, at least from Joicelyn and my perspective. But why didn't you talk to us when you had made this really bold decision to purchase this publication?
When you're dealing with transactions of magazines or media properties, you have to deal with the owners, and you have to deal with the owners. The owners 100%. So, in my discussions, with Harris. My goal was to make sure we had a discussion with them. Was it possible to buy it? To have this discussion. This is after I had left Vibe. This was when I was at the beginning of Vanguard. Yeah, before I had gotten to Honey, I had looked at a couple of other publications, and I had a few transactions not transpire. When you have financial advisors and when you have people that are putting in capital and different things, so they were very clear that the only discussion that I could have initially has to be with the owners. Despite the fact that the people that are making it work, the editors and the people that have done the operational work, they're going to have to be involved, or it's going to be a tough ride. So that's how I got to that point.
I'm really trying to understand why certain decisions were made. After he got our business plan, Keith eventually joined the chorus of no's. He doubted us too. Everyone did. Until a small publishing company, Harris Publications, said yes. They would publish our idea. According to them, they were going to publish something similar anyway. But they were only interested in offering us employment, not equity. A mere year after we finally launched Honey, definitely not with Black publishers, Keith came back around. What do you know? But this time, it was to buy Honey without our knowledge and without Jay and I having a stake in the deal. Again. It was well known by both parties that my friend and I were seeking a seat at the table. We were never interested in just having jobs. We were the executive producers, and they were the studio heads treating us like extras. But everyone involved was aware that Joicelyn and I had the goal of buying this magazine back. So why didn't Keith, when he decided after the fact to get on the Honey bandwagon, let us know he was planning to make a deal with Harris to purchase the magazine? Why didn't he say anything?
I'm dealing with the Harris folks. You are quite familiar with the Harris folks. It wasn't anything like that. As a matter of fact, they were adamant about making sure they talked to you guys as we began to have the discussions, because I knew this was going to be something I had to deal with. The toughest part about these things are getting their transactions, and the transactions can be difficult. It's just what it is. So I knew from the beginning, everything that you wanted to do, you wanted to be an owner. So that's not something that I was sitting there saying, oh, no, they don't want that. I was very clear of that. The toughest part about all these things is getting money.
I understand that intimately. It's why Joicelyn and I were in the position that we were in, this vulnerable position. Getting money the barriers were impossible to surmount. Go ahead.
Yeah, the barriers are impossible. If not impossible, they're very difficult. And then there are times when you're raising money or trying to get money, especially for minority media properties, you got to do what you can do to make sure you get it. And also, it wasn't like Harris and I were sitting around, having an enjoyable discussion about this. And it was rough, and we had gone through a few things to get to this point. So that's how it wound up there.
And all the while, we're making this magazine. And how? I don't even know, because we were so under-resourced on every level. It just reminds me of the ways in which Black women labor and other people benefit, because this is, to me, a classic story where both the white men and the Black men who hovered around this project, you all were playing tennis, right? And we're the ball. And it felt that way at the time. And I have to say, I don't live my life in the past, and I don't often even go here. But part of, I think, what I have struggled with, and I'm sure Joicelyn as well, over the years, was that we all knew that Honey was so uniquely special. I don't know that you knew that. I don't know that you know that to this day. But we certainly felt that what we had birthed had a unique path, a trajectory that was important. It was critical, and the audience of women that we were serving were so terribly underserved, even with the existence of Vibe and The Source and Double XL and all of these hip hop publications. I can't help but still feel a deep sense of regret, that the life of Honey, that the way that Joicelyn and I imagined it couldn't flourish and continue.
I saw what you had done with Honey to be exceptional. What you and Joicelyn had done to be exceptional. I knew from very early on it was powerful. I knew you had identified not just a unique and growing audience, but an audience that was going to become extremely influential as you did more and more and more to define it. I mean, what Honey represented was the beginning of what you have in an entire powerful Black women's movement right now, especially coming up through not just hip hop, but through all of culture. So you recognized it, and you also recognized down the road the impact it would have on advertising and marketing and all the different things in terms of the audiences. And well before things like Twitter and social media existed, this was going to be the audience that led the discussion, led the relevance, led the trends. And that has come true to this day.
Right, but you're saying that to me as though you're pitching me about the validity of the audience that I identified. What I'm saying to you is, do you recognize that the way in which you both purchased the magazine and then consequently handled the magazine, particularly in that first editorship and your first way out as with Honey as a Vanguard property, that you created an irreparable break? So the brand suffered. So now I clearly understand the value. I understand what we did, and I can draw a direct parallel between then and now. I see that we are foundational to so much of what we understand about the power of this audience led by Black and brown women, led by Black women, and with all women of color surrounding it. But I guess what I'm getting at is, do you see that you had a position in the dismantling of what, in theory, had a lot more potential than what was ever realized?
I see that we didn't handle it the way you thought we should handle it, but I definitely see that I saw the power of it, and I saw the work that you guys had done, and I never even got a chance to talk to you guys about whether you would continue or not, because by the time it came to me, you were already resigned from it. It wasn't my goal to say, okay, you can't come or any of that. That was not it.
You wouldn't even offer us our titles that we had worked for. You'd offered us something probationary and said, in 90 days, we'll revisit your roles. I mean, it was quite condescending. I'm getting at something, Keith, and I think you're dancing around it. Maybe I need to be clearer. There was a lot of, I'll call it what felt like sexist male kind of dismissiveness around the women who worked really hard to cement this thing so that there could even be a business conversation and however many dollars exchanged between parties. It wasn't just about me. I mean, there were droves, again, of letters. There was Black Planet. It was littered with audience, with folks saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? I understand that Honey exists in this larger Vanguard story for you, so it's not as singular. And I'm trying to hear in you whether or not you understand that some of the decisions you made were highly questionable at the time. And I'm curious about your reflections.
The decisions I made, were highly questionable, or you perceived them as highly questionable, but I'm also dealing with a situation where I'm dealing with trying to go ahead and keep a bunch of things going to keep something funded correctly. As I look back 20 years, do I not recognize the power of it? Yeah, I recognize the power of it. Do I think that what you're saying is, oh my God, it's so wrong? No, there's a few things I tried to do and didn't get them going. So by going this route was a way to try to make it happen. It wasn't so much to upset you. It was just to try to keep it moving.
Yes, no, I'm clear. And I don't think anybody would make any business decisions to upset me per se. I don't.
Or the audience. And you just have to understand I was in a unique spot. I did see some things and some things I couldn't see. So, but at the same time, the main thing was that the pain that you have for it, I have a similar kind of pain, certainly not the kind of pain that you have, nor would I try to claim that. But the whole thing, the whole setup was very important to me, you know, and I had a number of things that went on that could have helped us out that didn't. So I understand it.
We're back with Culturati, Conversations with Kierna Mayo. I'm your girl, Kierna. I can leap between my two selves, the young, ambitious person who started Honey and the 30-year professional who studied media and now worked in many publishing arenas, to somewhat understand why Keith mentioned his pain. I'm of his era, so I know firsthand exactly how challenging being Black in publishing was then. His dream really was impressive. This idea of a Black-owned media company, an entity that would be an empire, so to speak, where Black magazines would actually thrive. Of course, to whom much is given, much is required. All right, so let me wrap up this Keith talk because it's about to get very, very real. I have to say that I think a lot of the poor choices that were made that would ultimately become business decisions were foundationally poor because you, at least at the time, didn't have the respect that you say you have for me now then. And had you, we would have been in conversation. We would have been strategic because the things that people weren't supposed to talk about, you and I talked about during that time before the purchase of Honey. And so had you trusted that, I believe we could have had a mature conversation about a future that didn't feel dismissive and that wasn't dismissive to the work that myself and Joicelyn had put in, but more importantly, not about our feelings. Like this legacy of what you were going on to build, like you said, this work, you had blind spots, admittedly, like anyone building something. But I think they were compounded by the posture that a lot of the men in hip hop who were thriving and creating businesses, essentially resting on the culture. It was an attitude, it was a posture, it was a way that you move through the world that influenced your decision making. There's no doubt about it. And I just have to say, looking back 20 years, you can't help but wonder, had there been a bit more of something that was missing, you know, could Honey and could Vanguard at large have been a more fruitful experiment?
Oh, I mean, I think the most important thing in business is how do you recover from mistakes? You know, how do you recover from blind spots? How do you recover from errors? How do you recover from immaturity? You know, or there's certain things that the way I approached them were not correct. Absolutely. So, you know, but at the same time, the main thing in my speaking with you today was also to make sure that you see from the perspective of someone who's dealing with it. There's a number of things tugging at all this, and not just Honey. It was a couple other magazine purchases, other things that were going on at the same time to try to get them going, and other deals and things to put it together. But honestly, when I purchased the publication, I kind of felt, based on my relationship with you, we'd work it out. We'd work out the whole thing. And you and Joicelyn and your team would be running it. I didn't even talk to anybody before we published it about being a potential editorial crew or anything else like that. Now, because, quite frankly, when I just got done talking to a bunch of investors and talking to them about the greatness of this team, and then when we get the magazine, after going through all this stuff with Harris, then we're not going to get the team. The editorial team's not coming. Now I have to maintain a calm face and say, that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll handle it, and it wasn't something that was easy to do. And also, look, let's be honest, Kierna, the situation, the editorial path that you put together with Joicelyn, it was unique. It's just like when Jordan retired the first time, other guys came into play, but they weren't going to be Jordan. They just weren't going to do it. When you guys weren't there, it didn't matter who was going to be. That's a tough slot to fill, because not only was Honey a very good magazine, Honey was a movement. Honey was an emotional movement, and it was something that touched a number of women in a special way, especially through the powers of hip hop culture and fashion and style and all those things. But at the same time, after what I had told you, what it took to get the funding, what it took to get to that position, what it took to get them to sell, what it took to get that, then I had to deal with that, and then the decisions. I'm perfectly comfortable that the decisions might not have been right, because I was I was expecting to be working with you guys.
Right. Yes. And I imagine you were. It just seems like your ambitions were fueled by the work that we'd actually done. So you were banking on us continuing on as employees, once again, knowing where we had started.
No, Kierna, I wasn't banking on you being employees. As a matter of fact, we had dinner, and I knew that there was no way that you guys would go on being employees. And the reason why I wanted to have all of the, what you call a probationary period, at that time, I forget my age, but I was young to the world of private equity. I was young to the world of
Yes.
attorneys, and they were very clear about certain things and what could be offered. I'm dealing with the constraints that I'm provided. Then once we got people in and they were supposed to do, we're going to sit down and build that, because that was integral to the publication,
But Keith, my question is, I'm asking, so you were raising funds for Vanguard. You were having investor conversations, leveraging Honey, right? The promise was Honey. Take me and Joicelyn out of it. Vanguard didn't have any properties. Honey exists. You want Honey as a nucleus for this thing you're building. And you're leveraging Honey. Ultimately, you're also leveraging what you believe to be mine and Joicelyn's commitment to this thing.
Take a step back before we got to Honey, and I said this to you several times in this conversation. There were several media properties we were dealing with. One came close on, one didn't. This is all before we even got to Honey. Honey kind of was not a Hail Mary, but it was something that came out of us discussing XXL and some other things. That's how that happened. So Vanguard was not funded on Honey or all those things at all. So please don't believe that. That's not the case. But how we got it funded was just basically on the fact that I had done some publishing work before, and I had built Vibe up to a certain status, and I had talked to media entities of those days. So the opportunity was to get it. And again, the main thing was to make sure you always continue to highlight and hone in on the audience that I thought you both did an exceptional job of helping to define.
Here's what I'll say. I believe in restorative justice.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of folks are having a reckoning.
Yep.
I respect and appreciate you agreeing to show up and have this conversation. I don't think we've talked this long since 1999.
Yes.
And I imagined that you sensed that I have been, quote, feeling away for 20 years. But I'm appreciative of your clarification and perspective. I still take issue with much of what happened, both with you and with Harris. And again, I cannot divorce what I feel deeply is tied to Joicelyn and I being Black women in terms of how we were handled. I just have to say that, full stop. There's nothing you could say that would really change my perspective on that. But Keith, thanks for showing up, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to hear directly from you. From my perspective, I could think speaking my truth, and not holding things. And I'm hoping that from yours, an opportunity to set the record.
Well, I appreciate the discussion more than anything else. And I thank you for the opportunity to come and talk with you and talk in a real and frank manner. So I appreciate that, and thank you for the time.
So perhaps you can sense by now, there are no true villains in this story. Honey happened. Me and Sis, we made a magazine. But it was always more than a magazine. It was a response and a calling, and it was always bigger than Joicelyn and myself. Honey was part of a continuum of Black women using words, ideas, and images to take up critical space on the planet, to love up on each other. We were just one more offering in the Black woman's tradition of getting dressed for the other women at the party, of being the mirror. In the proper historical, cultural context, Honey is both daughter and mother. Today, I consider its meaning less from the position of co-founder and more from the place of cultural critic. Still, every so many years, memories bring me back to the magic Joicelyn and I set forth in the world and the promise of what might have been. I mourn not the dream deferred, but divorced. I get in my feelings about the toxic breakup she and I suffered from our servant work. But then I read more of Kathy Park Hong about her nourishing, creative sisterhood, and I remember that me and Jay are the kind of Black girl superheroes that you could never script the equivalent villains for. What we forged as friends who created together was a force. No weapon formed against us could ever prosper. Kathy writes that she and her girls, quote, had the confidence of white men, which was swiftly cut down when each of us had to prove ourselves again and again because we were, at every stage of our careers, underestimated. But I wouldn't have it any other way. That struggle kept me faithful to the creative imagination cultivated by our friendship, which was an imagination chiseled by rigor and depth to reflect the integrity of our discontented consciousness. No one else cared. No one else took us seriously. We were the only ones who demanded we be artists first. End quote. Listen, this was a word. You're listening to Culturati, Conversations with Kierna Mayo. I'm Kierna. I can never ever repay my sister Joicelyn Dingle for demanding that I be an artist first. Honey went on without us. I know now it was supposed to. At first it stung. Later, it was a validation. We did what we came to do. We galvanized all the young women of our generation who were chasing freedom. And we became freer along the way.
Honey actually spoke to the nuances of women of color.
We different type of girls, you know what I mean?
Honey was at the forefront. It stood alone in representing us in the way that we were. I mean, these multifaceted, beautiful young Black women who are not this monolithic group of just Black women.
It was like soul on paper.
It's like dead on. I just remember being in such awe, of like the flyness of it all and feeling like I wanted to be a part of what I saw as a sisterhood.
this was us.
Hi, Joicelyn.
Hi, Kierna.
I have something that I want to share with you, and I wonder how it's going to make you feel. It's an excerpt from a blog that went up some years after Honey went away, and it's by a woman, Renee Blewett. So, an ode to Honey. The media, much like music, has the power to immediately transport you back to a time and space. Honey magazine, the first incarnation, was like my first true love. It spoke to me in a way that no other magazine has or possibly ever will. Honey was the first magazine that truly resonated with me and an entire generation of brown girls across the country and beyond. With its on-point editorial content, flyer-than-fly fashion spreads, and tongue-in-cheek commentary, Honey magazine got it, and as a result, I made it my business to get it each month, faithfully. I remember the moment I laid hands on the highly coveted preview issue like it was yesterday. You know the one. Lauryn Hill graced the cover and in one amazing image showed the world just how beautiful Black can be. It was love at first sight. So what do you think of that?
I'm grateful. And I feel like she tapped into, I guess, what most of the women who talk to me about Honey or, mention Honey to me, they do it with such reverence. And it's moving because it just came from me and my best friend, and it was from our souls.
Yeah. Let's just talk a little bit about like our fantasy life for how Honey shows back up in the world. We got this documentary that we've been working on for a few years. And, I have an idea that we fictionalize this story and just get into the weeds about what it was like to be this couple of girls who was killing the game back then and making things happen. And then the white men, the Black men, and creating drama around that. So what are you thinking?
I'm already working on that.
Okay. Copy.
And I called you like the other day, like some crazy time in the night, because I had this whole thing of inspiration that I written down. I was like, oh my gosh, she doesn't even remember these things happen.
Well, you're my functioning memory, so you serve as that. Thank you again.
But yeah, so Honey, I'm down. Let's do the movie. Let's do, let's finish the documentary.
Let's do the
with
podcast.
Morel, Giancana.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Like, I really appreciate this energy right here, right now, and I'm grateful for it.
Y'all, I didn't see this moment coming. Who knew I'd have the opportunity, all these years after the fact, to hash out one of my longest-running personal traumas right here with you? These days, when I talk to badass young Black women who could literally be my daughters, times when I can't help but think about the legion of badass honey girls who came before them, I'm called to remember that our present, our right here, right now, is always equal parts past and equal parts future. Culturati is as much honey as anything I've done before or since. So come on this Culturati ride with me, fam. Once again, it's going to be real sweet, thick, brown, sticky, and most definitely pure. Culturati Conversations with Kierna Mayo is presented by Breakbeat and produced by PRX Productions. I'm the host and chief creator, Kierna Mayo. Our production team is Florence Barreau Adams, Sierra Spragley Ricks, Jonathan Cabral, and Jocelyn Gonzalez. Dave Mays and Kendrick Ashton are executive producers for Breakbeat. Visit breakbeatmedia.com or at Breakbeat Media on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you're feeling Culturati, be sure to follow me at Kierna Mayo, that's KIERNAMAYO, on Instagram and Twitter. Share, comment, and subscribe to Culturati wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening to Culturati Conversations with Kierna Mayo. We'll be back every couple weeks. Come talk with me.